Hiding in the barn from her husband's rage, she heard the cowboy say, "He won't find you here." Emma had always believed that home was meant to be a place of comfort and safety. It was a small, weathered farmhouse on the edge of a quiet town, surrounded by fields of golden wheat that swayed gently in the breeze during the day and glimmered under the moonlight at night. The farmhouse had a warm charm, with ivy crawling up the walls and a wooden porch that creaked underfoot. To the neighbors, it looked like a peaceful life, a simple happiness. But Emma knew the truth. The walls of her home held secrets she could not share with anyone. Behind the calm exterior, fear had quietly taken root, growing stronger with every passing year. That evening had started like any other, but Emma could feel the tension in the air from the moment her husband had returned from town. She could hear his footsteps from the driveway, heavy and uneven, and the rattle of the old truck bed as he climbed out. There was a certain rhythm to it, a cadence she had memorized over years of living with him, and tonight it carried a dangerous edge. The sound of the front door slamming shut made her stomach tighten. She tried to keep calm, pretending to be busy in the kitchen, washing dishes with hands soapy and trembling. Every small noise in the house felt magnified, each floorboard groan, each creak of the doors, each distant rustle of the wind outside seemed to echo inside her chest. Emma's husband had always been a complex man. When sober, he was charming in his own way, capable of deep affection and bursts of laughter that filled the house. But the alcohol changed him. She had learned over the years that the man she had married could turn unpredictable, angry, and sharp without warning. It was as if he carried two personas within him, the loving husband she had once fallen for, and a darker, more volatile side that could emerge in an instant. And tonight, she could sense the latter. He entered the kitchen without a word, his face flushed, eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. "Why are the dishes still here?" he snapped, slamming his hand on the counter. The plates rattled and Emma jumped back instinctively, her heart thudding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She lowered her gaze, keeping her voice soft. "I was just finishing up," she murmured, hoping her words would placate him, but it was no use. His anger, for reasons she could not understand, flared like a sudden storm. Words were exchanged, accusations that twisted the smallest disagreements into something unbearable. He had been in a bad mood all day, and she was now its target. She tried to reason, to appeal to the part of him she knew still cared for her, but his responses came fast and sharp, cutting through her attempts like cold wind. The tension in the room thickened, pressing on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Emma felt fear rising, raw and undeniable. She knew she had to act quickly. There was no time to think of a plan. Survival instincts had already taken over. Without a word, she slipped out of the kitchen, careful to keep her movements slow and quiet, like a shadow in the dark. Her feet made barely a sound on the worn wooden floor as she moved toward the back door, heart pounding in her ears. The cold night air hit her face as she stepped outside, sharp against her skin, and she felt a brief rush of hope. The night could hide her if she moved fast enough. The barn was not far, only a short walk across the yard, but to Emma, it felt like a long journey through danger. Each step seemed louder than the last, each sound from the house. A door slamming, a chair scraping, sent shivers down her spine. Her mind raced as she thought of every possible hiding place, but she knew the barn offered the best chance. It was old and mostly empty, with hay bales stacked haphazardly in the corners and the faint scent of straw lingering in the air. It was a place most people ignored, a structure meant for animals and equipment rather than humans, and that made it perfect. Emma reached the barn, fumbling with the old wooden door until it gave way with a squeak that made her flinch. She slipped inside, pressing herself against the wall as if being smaller could make her invisible. The barn smelled of dust and hay, and a thin beam of moonlight fell through a crack in the wall, cutting across the floor. She could hear her own breathing, ragged and loud, and the pounding of her heart. She tried to calm herself, whispering silently, "It's okay. It's okay. He won't find me." But the words felt hollow. She knew she was in danger, and every instinct screamed that she needed to stay alert. Emma crouched behind a stack of hay bales, trying to disappear into the shadows. She could hear the sound of her husband searching the house, his angry footsteps approaching the back door. Her stomach twisted with dread. She imagined him storming into the barn, finding her, and all the pain that would follow. The fear was sharp, almost physical, and tears began to blur her vision. She wiped them quickly, knowing that crying would only give her away if he discovered her hiding place. Minutes stretched into hours as she listened. The wind whispered through the cracks in the barn walls, rustling the hay and creating eerie shadows that danced across the floor. Emma's mind raced with memories of the life she had hoped for, the simple joys, the laughter, the quiet moments she had shared with her husband before anger had poisoned their home. She remembered the times she had laughed freely, when his smile had been genuine, when their hands had held each other with love rather than fear. Those memories made her stomach ache, but they also gave her a strange kind of strength. She realized she had survived much more than she had ever admitted to herself, and she could survive this night too. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise, a door creaking, footsteps approaching. Emma froze, holding her breath as the shadow of a man passed across the barn floor. She tensed, ready to bolt if necessary, but then realized it wasn't her husband. The figure paused at the entrance, tall and steady, holding a lantern. Emma's heart leapt in surprise and confusion. Who could it be at this hour in a barn far from the town lights? The man's voice came, low and calm, breaking the heavy silence. "He won't find you here," he said. Emma's body sagged slightly in relief, though her heart continued to race. She wanted to speak, to ask how he knew, how he could help, but words failed her. The stranger seemed to understand without explanation, his presence alone providing a fragile sense of safety. Emma's mind struggled to process the moment. She had gone from fear to a glimmer of hope so quickly that it almost felt unreal. The barn, once merely a place to hide, now felt like a sanctuary. She realized that while she could not control everything around her, she could take small steps to protect herself. And right now, staying hidden and trusting that someone cared was enough. The night stretched on, and Emma stayed behind the hay, listening to the sounds of the farm and the quiet steps of the man who had appeared. Each sound, each creak of the barn, reminded her of the danger she had narrowly escaped, but also of the courage she possessed. She had hidden in fear before, but never with someone watching over her so quietly, so carefully. She felt a spark of determination, a whisper of strength that told her she could survive this night and perhaps find a better life beyond it. By the time the first hints of moonlight faded into dawn, Emma had begun to feel a fragile sense of calm. She knew that the danger was not fully gone, but she had survived the worst of it. The barn, once a place of shadows and fear, had become a quiet refuge where she could catch her breath and begin to think. Her mind wandered to what the future could hold, to the possibility of safety and hope, and she realized that this night, terrifying as it had been, marked the beginning of something new. Emma stayed in the barn long after the immediate threat had passed, listening to the wind and the soft rustling of hay. The darkness, once oppressive, seemed to hold a strange comfort. She thought of the stranger who had appeared when she needed help most, a reminder that kindness existed even in moments of fear. And as she sat there, hidden yet safe, she promised herself that she would not let fear control her life forever. She would find a way to take back her strength, step by step, beginning with surviving this night. Emma had barely dared to breathe when she first saw the figure in the barn. The moonlight filtering through the gaps in the wooden walls outlined him like a shadow, tall and steady, holding a lantern that cast a soft glow across the dusty hay. For a moment she thought it might be another threat, another person who could harm her, but there was something in the way he moved, calm and deliberate, that told her he meant no danger. Her body, tense with hours of fear, felt a tiny flicker of relief, though her mind struggled to trust it. The man crouched slightly, lowering himself just enough to appear non-threatening. "He won't find you here," he whispered, his voice steady, carrying a quiet assurance that made her heart skip a beat. The words were simple, yet they held a kind of magic, breaking through the panic that had gripped her all night. Emma remained silent, unsure whether to respond or hide deeper into the shadows. She had spent years learning not to trust easily, not to hope too quickly. But the warmth in his voice made her hesitate, softened the instinct to run. "Are you safe?" she asked finally, her voice barely audible, trembling with fatigue and fear. The man nodded, moving a step closer but keeping a respectful distance. His movements were careful, deliberate, showing that he understood the delicate balance of offering help without overstepping. Emma could see the kind lines of his face under the lantern light, a face weathered by time and sun, the kind that had seen hard work and long roads. His eyes held a calm certainty that was rare in her life, and for the first time that night she felt a flicker of hope. "I saw what happened," he said quietly, as if reading her mind. "I was passing by, and I noticed someone running from the house. I followed, and here you are." Emma's eyes widened. He had been watching her from afar, paying attention, understanding that she needed help. There was no judgment in his tone, only concern. She swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. She had spent so many nights hiding, feeling alone and trapped, that having someone show up out of nowhere felt almost unreal. The man motioned toward a shadowy corner of the barn. "Stay here, behind the hay. I'll make sure it's safe." His words were gentle but firm, and Emma found herself nodding silently, feeling her tension ease just a fraction. She watched as he moved toward the barn entrance, lantern in hand, and felt a strange sense of security. Even in the darkness and fear, she could sense that she was not entirely alone. Time passed slowly. Emma stayed hidden, her eyes following the movements of the stranger as he stood watch near the door. The barn was quiet, save for the occasional creak of wood and the soft whisper of wind through the cracks in the walls. Each sound made her jump, her nerves still raw from the hours of fear she had endured. But the presence of the man, steady and unwavering, allowed her to breathe in ways she hadn't for a long time. She could feel her heart slowly finding a rhythm beyond panic, her mind clearing enough to think about what had happened and what might come next. In the quiet, Emma's thoughts wandered back to her life, to the moments that had led her to this barn. She thought of her husband, of the man she had once loved, who had become a source of fear over the years. She remembered the promises made when they first married, promises of love, safety, and partnership. Somewhere along the way, those promises had broken, replaced by anger, shouting, and fear. She realized how much courage it had taken just to leave the house tonight, to seek safety instead of remaining trapped. The barn, filled with hay and shadows, had become a symbol of her own resilience. The man with the lantern shifted slightly, his presence a comforting reminder that she was not entirely powerless. He didn't speak unnecessarily, only when needed, allowing her to regain control of her own emotions. Emma felt a strange gratitude. In all the moments of her life when she had felt small and afraid, rarely had anyone truly noticed her struggles. Tonight, this stranger had, and that made a difference she could not put into words. "Do you want to talk?" he asked softly after a while, his voice careful, giving her space. Emma hesitated. She had always been cautious about sharing her fears, especially with strangers, but something in his calm demeanor encouraged her. I don't know if it's safe," she admitted quietly, her voice shaking. The man nodded, understanding, and simply said, "Then we'll just wait. I'll stay until it is." Hours passed in silence, the quiet stretching but never feeling empty. Emma noticed small things. The way the lantern's light flickered against the walls, the smell of hay that seemed almost comforting now, the soft rustle of the wind outside. Her senses, previously consumed by fear, began to notice details she had overlooked in everyday life. She realized that even in moments of danger, there was space for calm, for observation, for reflection. It was a lesson she had never expected to learn in a barn at night, hiding from someone who once promised her love. Gradually, Emma's breathing slowed, and her mind began to wander beyond the immediate fear. She thought about the life she wanted, a life where she could feel safe and valued. She imagined small joys, waking up without fear, walking through the fields in sunlight, hearing the wind in the trees without worry. These thoughts, though simple, brought her comfort. For the first time in what felt like years, she dared to hope. The man noticed her shift in mood and offered a small smile, the kind that conveyed understanding without words. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. Emma blinked, surprised. No one had ever said that to her before. She had always been told to endure, to be patient, to avoid conflict. Yet here was someone acknowledging her strength, her courage, even in her fear. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of validation she hadn't realized she needed so desperately. She spoke a little more, hesitantly, telling him about the night, about how her husband's anger had escalated, about the hours of tension that had led her to the barn. The man listened patiently, never interrupting, never judging. He offered small reassurances, reminders that she was not alone and that she deserved safety. For Emma, the simple act of being heard without fear of criticism was revolutionary. As the night wore on, Emma felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. Her body ached from hiding, from tensing in fear, from running across the yard to reach the barn. But even in her fatigue, she felt a strange sense of empowerment. She had acted to protect herself, had found a way to survive. The presence of the man had made that survival possible, but the courage had come from within her. She realized that bravery was not always loud or dramatic. It was quiet, persistent, and deeply personal. The wind outside shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of the town that seemed so far away, so peaceful in contrast to the turmoil she had left behind. Emma felt a flicker of relief. The night was still dark, but the danger seemed less immediate. She glanced at the man, who had remained watchful the entire time, his lantern casting a steady glow that kept the shadows at bay. He had said little, but his actions had spoken volumes. He had shown her that kindness and vigilance could exist even in the most unlikely places. Finally, as the hours began to hint at the approach of dawn, Emma allowed herself to relax slightly, leaning against the hay bales. She could feel the tension in her muscles easing, her mind beginning to shift from survival to planning. She knew that when the morning came, she would have to make choices about the next steps in her life. But tonight, she was safe, and that was enough. Emma realized that the barn had become more than just a hiding place. It was a sanctuary, a temporary refuge where fear had met hope. The man had been a guardian in the night, showing her that even in moments of desperation, help could appear in unexpected forms. She promised herself that she would remember this night, not just for the fear, but for the courage it had revealed within her and the kindness shown by a stranger who had understood her need without question. By the time the first hints of dawn began to appear, Emma felt a fragile but growing sense of calm. The barn, once filled with shadows and fear, now held a quiet reassurance. She realized that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about finding strength in herself, about recognizing the people who could help, and about holding on to hope even when it seemed impossible. The man had come into her life for only a moment, but that moment had changed everything. As she sat quietly, Emma allowed herself to think about the future with a small spark of hope. She knew that the night's events had changed her, that she could not go back to the same life she had known. But she also knew that she could face what was ahead, one step at a time. And somewhere in the back of her mind, the words of the stranger echoed, steady and comforting. He won't find you here. The presence of the cowboy, steady and watchful at the barn's entrance, allowed her a rare chance to breathe, to think, and even to reflect on her life with a clarity that frightened her as much as it comforted her. She could still hear the wind rustling through the gaps in the barn walls, carrying with it the distant, muted sounds of the world outside, a world she had been too afraid to face for far too long. Emma thought about her life before fear had taken over, about the small joys that had once seemed ordinary. She remembered waking up to the sun spilling across the wooden floorboards of the farmhouse, the smell of breakfast in the kitchen, and the sound of laughter echoing through the rooms. Those moments had felt safe, secure, and real. But over the years, fear had slowly crept in, shadowing everything she once loved. Every harsh word, every angry glance had slowly chipped away at her confidence, leaving her uncertain and wary. Now, hiding in the barn, she could see that fear for what it was, a wall she had built around herself to survive. The cowboy had not spoken much, but his silence was comforting. He moved occasionally, shifting the lantern slightly to illuminate the barn without casting harsh shadows, and every movement showed thoughtfulness, respect, and caution. Emma realized that his presence was more than just physical safety. It was reassurance that someone cared enough to stay, to watch, to offer protection without demanding anything in return. She found herself marveling at his calmness, the quiet authority in his posture, and the patience in his eyes. It was a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind in the farmhouse. Her mind began to replay the events that had led her here. She remembered the first signs of change in her husband, the subtle irritations, the sharpness of his tone, the small acts of control that at first seemed insignificant but grew heavier over time. She thought about the nights spent walking on eggshells, never knowing which comment might trigger his anger, never knowing which mistake might bring his rage crashing down. Emma realized that surviving all those nights had required courage she had never acknowledged. She had endured fear for so long that she had forgotten the strength it took just to exist under such pressure. Emma's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise, a soft rustle near the barn door. Her heart leapt, muscles tensing instinctively. The cowboy moved without hesitation, positioning himself so that any intruder would see him first. Emma felt a mixture of fear and gratitude. She realized that while she had hidden and waited, the man had taken action, protecting her without a word. It was a silent partnership, built on trust that had formed in a few short hours, yet it felt as though they had known each other far longer. The wind shifted again, and Emma shivered, the chill seeping through her clothes. The cowboy noticed, and adjusted the lantern's position to reflect more light into the darker corners of the barn, giving her a sense of warmth and security. She felt a strange comfort in knowing someone was attentive to even the smallest details, someone who cared enough to make her environment safer without asking anything in return. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, a feeling that reminded her of simpler, gentler times. As the night deepened, Emma found herself thinking not just about the past, but about the future. She began to imagine what it might look like to live without fear, to walk outside without the constant anxiety of being watched or controlled. She envisioned small victories, being able to make decisions for herself, to enjoy quiet moments without tension, and to reclaim the life that had once been full of possibility. Each thought brought with it a flicker of hope, a realization that survival tonight could be the first step toward something greater. The cowboy's presence, quiet and steadfast, seemed to mirror her thoughts. He did not offer advice or demand explanations. He simply existed as a protective figure, allowing her to process her feelings and begin to find clarity. Emma noticed little details about him, the way his hands moved when he adjusted the lantern, the faint lines on his weathered face that spoke of experience, the steady calm in his voice whenever he spoke. These observations, simple as they were, grounded her in the present and reminded her that even amidst fear, there could be reliability, care, and trust. Hours passed, and Emma's mind wandered to the choices she would need to make. She realized that hiding in the barn was only temporary. The real challenge would come when she had to step out of this sanctuary and make decisions about her life. The thought was daunting, but it was also liberating. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of agency, however small. She could plan, she could think, and most importantly, she could survive. Survival was no longer just about escaping anger, it was about reclaiming herself. Emma also reflected on the courage it had taken to run, to leave the house, to seek refuge in the barn. She realized that every step she had taken tonight was an act of bravery, a declaration that she would no longer be trapped by fear. The memory of her husband's rage still lingered, but it no longer held the same power over her. With each passing moment, she felt more in control, more aware of her own strength, and more capable of facing the challenges that lay ahead. The cowboy occasionally spoke, always softly, always at the right moment. "You're safe for now," he said at one point, and the simple words carried weight. They reminded her that safety was not a given, but a state that could be nurtured and protected. She realized that while she had felt powerless for so long, there were moments where courage and vigilance could create safety, even in the darkest circumstances. The man had shown her that tonight, not with force but with presence and care. Emma's thoughts drifted further to the concept of hope itself. She had long avoided hope, fearing it would make disappointment worse. But tonight, she saw that hope could coexist with caution, that it could be a quiet, steady flame even amidst fear. She imagined a future where she could embrace hope fully, where she could make choices for herself without constantly looking over her shoulder. Each thought strengthened her resolve, giving her a vision of life beyond the barn and beyond fear. She also thought about trust. Trust had been something she had given sparingly, guarded jealously, because it had been broken too many times. But the cowboy had earned her trust, not through words but through actions, through vigilance, patience, and respect. Emma realized that trust was not just a feeling, it was built through consistency and care. And in that barn, in the quiet hours of the night, she had experienced that trust for the first time in years. The night began to lose its intensity as the first hints of dawn appeared, soft and pale on the horizon. The barn, once a place of shadows and fear, seemed transformed by the coming light. Emma felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Relief that she had survived the night, and anticipation for the possibilities that daylight might bring. She knew that the world outside was still full of challenges, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them, step by step. The cowboy remained near the barn entrance, his lantern now dimmed as the natural light grew. Emma noticed how the shadows receded, revealing the details of the barn, the hay scattered on the floor, the old wooden beams, the faint smell of straw that had become strangely comforting. She realized that the barn had been more than a hiding place. It had been a space for reflection, for understanding, and for the quiet recognition of her own resilience. She thought about the lessons of the night, the importance of courage, the power of patience, and the unexpected kindness of strangers. The cowboy had shown her that protection could be offered without expectation, that safety could exist even in the smallest of gestures, and that hope could emerge in the darkest of times. Emma felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that she would carry these lessons with her long after the night had ended. Finally, as the sun began to rise, casting a soft golden glow over the fields beyond the barn, Emma allowed herself to feel a sense of possibility. The night had been harrowing, but it had also revealed a strength she had long forgotten. She knew that challenges still awaited her, that the road ahead would not be easy, but she felt ready to face it with a newfound clarity and determination. The barn, the cowboy, and the night's events had given her more than safety. They had given her the courage to imagine a better life. Emma realized that survival was no longer just about hiding from danger. It was about embracing her own strength, recognizing the care of others, and allowing hope to guide her forward. She knew that the night had changed her, that it had shifted something deep within her, and that she would never look at fear the same way again. The quiet hours of the barn had been transformative, teaching her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. As she sat quietly, watching the first light touch the walls of the barn, Emma felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. The night's terror had been intense, but it had also been illuminating. She had faced fear, found safety, and discovered strength. And as the cowboy's presence remained a steady, reassuring presence near the doorway, she knew that she was not alone. For the first time in a long while, Emma allowed herself to imagine the future without fear, without hesitation, and with the quiet certainty that she could face whatever came next. The night had been long and difficult, but it had also been a turning point, a night that revealed resilience, kindness, and the possibility of hope. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the fields outside the barn in soft shades of gold and orange. For the first time since the night had begun, Emma felt the terror that had consumed her begin to ebb. She sat quietly behind the hay, feeling the warmth of the morning sunlight on her face, and allowed herself to breathe deeply. The cold, anxious tension that had gripped her body all night was loosening, replaced by a cautious hope. She looked at the cowboy, who still stood watch near the barn entrance, his posture calm, alert, and unwavering. His presence had become her anchor through the long, dark hours, and seeing him there reminded her that the night's ordeal was drawing to a close. Emma slowly rose to her feet, still cautious. Her legs felt stiff and weak from hours of crouching and hiding, but there was a new strength in her posture, a subtle confidence that had not been there before. She took a careful step toward the barn door, pausing to glance behind her at the shadows of the hay bales that had been her sanctuary. That night in the barn had changed her. It had shown her that she could survive, that she could act with courage even when fear threatened to paralyze her. She realized that this moment, standing at the threshold of morning, was not just the end of a night of terror, but the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The cowboy motioned gently for her to stay close. "We'll move quietly," he said in his soft, calm voice. Emma nodded, feeling trust in his guidance. There was no rush, no unnecessary words, just the shared understanding that she needed safety as she stepped into the new day. He guided her toward the back of the property, keeping her low and careful, alert for any sign of her husband or anyone who might threaten her. Emma followed, her hands trembling slightly, but her mind was clearer than it had been in months. She could think, plan, and feel. As they moved, Emma's mind wandered back over the past hours, replaying the fear and the courage, the terror and the reassurance. She remembered the first moments in the barn, the shadowed corners where she had hidden, and the overwhelming sense of hopelessness that had threatened to consume her. And yet, she also remembered the kindness of the cowboy, the calmness in his presence, and the way he had shown her that protection and trust could exist even in the darkest circumstances. She felt a wave of gratitude, one she had never been able to feel in her previous life, and a determination began to take root. She would not go back to fear, not now, not ever. The cowboy led her carefully through the fields, staying close to the edges where trees and tall grasses offered some cover. The air was crisp with the freshness of morning, carrying the scent of damp earth and wildflowers, and Emma realized she could hear birds beginning to sing for the first time that night. The sound, simple and ordinary, felt miraculous after hours of fear. She allowed herself to notice it, to breathe it in, and to feel a sense of connection to the world outside the barn. It reminded her that life continued beyond the shadows, beyond fear, and that she had a chance to step into it once more. Emma's thoughts turned to what she would do next. She knew she could not return to the farmhouse. The place she had once called home had become a symbol of fear and control. But she also knew she could not remain here, hidden in the fields, indefinitely. She needed a plan, a place to go, people who could help her. The cowboy seemed to sense her thoughts as if he could read her mind. "There's a safe place nearby," he said quietly. "You can rest there, plan your next steps, and make decisions without fear." His words offered reassurance, a promise of stability that Emma had longed for but never dared to imagine. The journey to the safe place was slow and deliberate. They moved through narrow paths between the fields, careful to avoid the main road where anyone might see them. Emma felt her body responding to the movement, muscles tense but alert, heart beating steadily now with a mixture of relief and cautious anticipation. She had survived the night, but she knew she needed to remain vigilant until she reached a place where she could truly feel safe. The cowboy stayed close, adjusting their path when necessary, always aware, always protective, giving her the security she needed to keep going. As they approached a small, secluded cabin tucked behind a grove of trees, Emma felt a surge of hope. The cabin was modest but inviting, with smoke curling gently from the chimney and a small garden that hinted at life and care. It was a stark contrast to the fear and chaos she had left behind in the farmhouse. The cowboy led her inside, where a warm fire crackled in the hearth, and Emma could feel the tension in her shoulders finally begin to release. She sank onto a wooden chair, exhausted but relieved, and allowed herself to take a moment to breathe, to absorb the safety of the place. The cabin was simple, but it held a sense of stability that Emma had not known for years. She noticed the small touches, a clean kitchen, fresh linens, and sunlight streaming through the windows, that made it feel like more than a temporary refuge. It was a place where she could rest, plan, and begin to reclaim the life she had been forced to hide from. She realized that safety was not just about avoiding danger. It was about having a place where she could exist freely, without fear or control. For the first time in a long while, she felt that possibility. The cowboy remained near the door, ensuring that no one could enter without her knowledge. He offered her a small cup of tea, and Emma accepted, grateful for the simple gesture. She sipped it slowly, feeling the warmth spread through her body, calming her nerves and helping her gather her thoughts. The night in the barn, the journey through the fields, and now the warmth of this cabin all combined to create a sense of relief that was almost overwhelming. She had survived, and she had been cared for along the way. As the sun rose higher, Emma began to think about the choices she would need to make. She knew she could not rely on this cabin forever. She would need to build a life for herself, independent and free from fear. But for now, she allowed herself to simply rest, to feel safe, and to acknowledge the strength that had carried her through the night. She realized that her courage had not gone unnoticed, not by the cowboy and not by herself. She had acted, survived, and now had the opportunity to shape her future. The cowboy spoke quietly, "Take your time. When you're ready, you can decide what comes next. You're safe here." His words were simple, but they carried weight. Emma felt the significance of them deeply. She had never had someone say that to her before, not in her life at home, not in the years of fear she had endured. To be given safety without condition, to be allowed time to recover and plan, was a gift she could scarcely believe. She felt gratitude welling up inside her, a mix of relief, hope, and recognition that her life could be different. Emma spent the morning resting and reflecting. She allowed herself to remember the barn, the fear she had felt, and the courage she had discovered within herself. She thought about the cowboy, who had appeared like a guardian in the night, who had offered protection, patience, and trust. She realized that even though she had been terrified, she had acted with bravery, and that bravery had carried her to safety. The night had tested her in every way, but it had also shown her what she was capable of enduring, surviving, and ultimately overcoming. By midday, Emma felt stronger, more focused, and ready to consider her next steps. She knew she could not remain hidden forever, but she also knew that she had survived the worst of the fear that had dominated her life. She felt a sense of empowerment she had not felt in years, a realization that she could now take control of her destiny. The cabin, the cowboy, and the quiet morning had given her clarity and courage, and she felt ready to move forward, one careful step at a time. As she prepared to leave the cabin later that day, Emma turned to the cowboy. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying the depth of her gratitude. "I don't know how to repay you." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "You don't need to," he said. "Just live, that's enough." His words were simple, yet they resonated deeply within her. For the first time in years, Emma felt as though her life truly belonged to her again, not controlled by fear, anger, or anyone else. Stepping outside the cabin, Emma felt the sun fully warming her face. The field stretched out before her, golden and alive with the promise of a new day. She breathed deeply, feeling the air fill her lungs, and allowed herself to feel hope without hesitation. The night in the barn, the presence of the cowboy, and the journey to safety had all been transformative. She realized that she had been given a second chance, not just to survive, but to live fully, bravely, and freely. Emma knew that challenges would still come, that life would not always be easy, but she now felt ready to face them. She had discovered courage, resilience, and the kindness of strangers. Most importantly, she had discovered her own strength. The words of the cowboy echoed in her mind. "He won't find you here." They were more than a reassurance. They were a promise, a declaration of her safety and the beginning of her new life. With that thought, Emma took her first steps into the fields, the golden sunlight stretching before her. Each step felt lighter than the last, each breath freer, each moment filled with possibility. The barn and the night's terror were behind her, replaced by hope, courage, and the quiet knowledge that she could survive, thrive, and live the life she deserved. And though the cowboy faded into the background, leaving her to walk forward on her own, the lessons of the night, the strength, the trust, and the hope remained with her forever. Emma walked toward her future with a steady heart, carrying the courage she had discovered, the memory of kindness, and the certainty that she would never again let fear control her life. The sun rose higher, and the fields seemed to stretch endlessly, full of promise, full of life, and full of hope. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt truly free. The morning after the long night in the barn had passed, Emma felt a strange mixture of relief and determination. The cabin she had been guided to offered a temporary safety, but she knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The freedom she felt now was fragile, like a delicate flame in the wind, but it was also powerful, and it gave her hope. She had survived fear, and that meant she could face what came next, whatever challenges the day might bring. She spent the early hours cleaning herself up, tending to the small cuts and scratches she had picked up while running through the fields. Her hands were sore from the cold, and her muscles ached from hours of hiding and crouching, but she welcomed the pain. It reminded her that she was alive, that she had acted to save herself, and that every step she had taken had been a testament to her strength. Sitting by the window, watching sunlight spill across the cabin floor, Emma allowed herself to reflect on the past. She thought about her husband, about the anger that had trapped her for so long, and about the courage it had taken to escape that life. Emma realized that while fear had controlled her for years, she now had a chance to reclaim control over her own life. She had been passive before, letting circumstances dictate her every action, but now she understood that survival was not enough. She needed to plan, to act, and to take steps toward a future she deserved. And for the first time, she felt that possibility truly within reach. The cowboy, who had watched over her the night before, offered quiet guidance. He had left the cabin for a short while to gather supplies but returned with food, water, and blankets. He did not ask for anything in return, did not demand explanations. He simply provided what was needed. Emma felt grateful but also deeply moved. She realized that trust could exist without obligation, that kindness could appear without expectation, and that sometimes the smallest acts of care could carry the greatest weight. After a simple breakfast, the cowboy spoke. "You can stay here for a few days, recover and gather your strength," he said. "But eventually, you'll need to think about a long-term plan. Staying hidden isn't permanent." Emma nodded slowly, understanding the truth in his words. She could not remain hidden forever. She would need to take steps to build a safe, independent life, free from fear and control. The thought was daunting, but she felt ready to face it. Over the next few days, Emma began to explore the area around the cabin. The field stretched endlessly, golden under the sun, with trees and wildflowers offering beauty and a sense of peace she had not felt in years. She walked slowly, letting her senses absorb the environment. The wind carried the scent of fresh earth, the songs of birds filled the air, and the warmth of the sun against her skin felt almost magical. She realized that the world outside her old farmhouse was not as dangerous as she had feared. There was life, beauty, and safety waiting for her, if only she took the steps to claim it. Each day brought small victories. Emma learned to move through the fields without fear, to listen to her instincts, and to trust the quiet guidance of the cowboy when necessary. She felt her confidence grow, like a seed sprouting in fertile soil. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel pride in her courage, to recognize that she had faced fear head-on and survived. And in those moments, the memory of the barn, the night of terror, and the kindness of the cowboy became not just memories but lessons. They reminded her that she was stronger than she had ever believed, and that she could act decisively when needed. The cowboy also began to teach her practical skills. He showed her how to move quietly through the fields, how to recognize safe hiding spots, and how to protect herself if danger ever returned. Emma was a quick learner, absorbing every detail with care and determination. She realized that knowledge and preparation could be just as powerful as courage. The combination of both gave her a sense of control that she had never experienced before. She began to feel empowered, not just in her immediate survival, but in the larger context of her life. One afternoon, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, Emma sat by the cabin and allowed herself to imagine her future. She pictured a life where she could make decisions freely, pursue her goals, and live without the constant anxiety that had shadowed her for so long. She saw herself walking through the fields with confidence, tending a small garden, and building connections with people who cared for her without judgment or control. These visions were tentative, fragile, but they filled her with a renewed sense of hope and purpose. The cowboy noticed the change in her demeanor and smiled quietly. "You're ready to take the next step," he said softly. Emma felt a mixture of apprehension and determination. The thought of leaving the cabin, of stepping fully into the world again, was both exciting and frightening. But she understood that growth often required courage, that safety alone was not enough. To truly reclaim her life, she needed to act, to move forward, and to embrace the possibilities before her. As the days passed, Emma prepared herself for the journey ahead. She gathered supplies, packed essential items, and made careful plans for where she could go next. She thought about finding a place to live independently, securing work, and connecting with people who could support her. Every small task, every decision, reinforced her confidence. She realized that while the past had shaped her, it did not define her. She had the power to shape her future, one step at a time. One morning, Emma stood at the edge of the field, looking out toward the distant road that would take her to a new life. The sun was warm, the air fresh, and the world seemed alive with possibilities. She felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement, knowing that the next step would require courage, planning, and determination. The cowboy stood nearby, giving her the final reassurance she needed. "Remember," he said, "trust yourself." You've come this far and you can go further. His words echoed in her mind, filling her with confidence and clarity. As she began her journey, Emma felt the wind against her face, carrying with it the promise of freedom and a life shaped by her own choices. Every step was deliberate, a declaration of independence and strength. She thought of the barn, the cabin, and the moments of fear and courage that had brought her here. Each memory reminded her of what she had endured and what she had overcome. She realized that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about reclaiming her life, embracing hope, and stepping forward with courage. Along the way, Emma encountered challenges. There were moments of doubt, moments when fear threatened to return, and moments when uncertainty clouded her thoughts. But she faced each one with determination, drawing on the lessons of the past nights. She remembered the calm presence of the cowboy, the quiet guidance, and the reassurance that she was not alone. She drew strength from these memories, understanding that courage was not the absence of fear but the willingness to act despite it. As the sun rose higher, Emma finally reached the edge of the town, a place she had once feared but now approached with purpose. The streets were quiet in the early morning, the town slowly coming to life. She felt the weight of the past lifting slightly with every step, replaced by anticipation and a cautious optimism. The journey ahead would not be easy, she knew, but she felt ready. She had survived the night, reclaimed her strength, and discovered the power of hope and determination. Emma also thought about the future relationships she might build, the friendships she might cultivate, and the life she could create for herself. She had learned to trust, to act with courage, and to recognize kindness when it appeared. These lessons would guide her in the days and months to come. She felt empowered, ready to face the challenges of the world, and determined to live a life defined by her choices rather than fear. The journey was not just physical but emotional and spiritual. Emma realized that every step she took away from fear was a step toward freedom. She began to understand that life was not just about surviving. It was about living fully, embracing hope, and building a future shaped by courage and determination. The barn, the cabin, and the cowboy had all been part of her journey, each a reminder of what she could endure, achieve, and overcome. By the time she reached a small, welcoming inn at the edge of town, Emma felt a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. She had left behind the darkness of fear, embraced the lessons of courage, and stepped fully into a world filled with possibility. She checked into a small room, unpacked her belongings, and allowed herself to rest, knowing that the next chapter of her life was beginning. The inn offered safety, warmth, and a chance to plan her next steps. For the first time in years, Emma felt a profound sense of relief, accomplishment, and hope. Sitting by the window that evening, watching the sun set over the town, Emma reflected on her journey. She remembered the terror of the barn, the guidance of the cowboy, and the sanctuary of the cabin. Each experience had shaped her, teaching her about courage, trust, and the possibility of a better life. She realized that the journey was far from over, but she now had the tools, the determination, and the hope to face whatever came next. Emma smiled quietly, feeling the warmth of the room and the strength within herself. She had survived fear, embraced courage, and reclaimed her life. And as the night fell gently over the town, she allowed herself to imagine a future full of freedom, possibilities, and hope, a future entirely her own.